And we are back. Welcome to part 2 of Daring Dialogues for today. I am your host, Shantae Charles. We are reading from Hope on a Tight Rope, the words and wisdom of Dr. Cornel West. Thank you for coming right back in, and thank you for swiping and inviting your followers. All right. Thank you for coming back in, Prophet Jonathan, Pastor Ben. And we're going to give just a minute for us to come back in. He makes a very, very good point here with the older people. Thank you. He makes a very important point here with the older people. He says, older black folk have seen so many efforts come to naught. Older black folk have seen so many efforts come to naught, and they're just trying to survive. But young folks still have a sense of spring. I call it spring consciousness, a consciousness full of dreams and possibilities, and a willingness to sacrifice. Now, if you are, I won't make anybody give their age on here, but if you are probably in your maybe 55 and older, right? You have seen some things in America, and you have probably, is what he's saying, decided that there are certain things about America that are not going to change. And so you're like, listen, I'm too old to be out here marching in these streets, right? Or you might be of the mindset of, I have seen this story before. I have seen people marching in the streets. I have seen, America promise to do right by Black Americans, and they still get nothing. And so what he's saying is, the older people are like, listen, I'm just trying to survive. I'm trying to retire. I'm trying to make sure I have a little money in the bank. I've done my share of marching and fighting and pleading and trying to get this society to change, right? But then he said, but then you have young people who are just joining the fight. Meaning they're just now starting to realize that as long as Black Americans have been in this country, they have been fighting as the movie The Color Purple says, all my life I've had to fight, right? That is really how some Black Americans feel. Like, is there ever going to be a time in America where we are not fighting to be seen as simply as human beings? Is there not a time where we can just, as they say, rest on our laurels and say, okay, America's got it now. We've been here for about 400 years. You would think by now, after all the hoopla, after all of the HE double hockey sticks, right? After all of the oppression, after all of the suppression, after all of the policies that have been put into place to keep us down, etc., still we rise. You would think by now that America would get it, right? That we're here to stay, that we're not going anywhere, that our children are not going anywhere, that we're here. But it seems like year after year, some of the same kinds of battles and struggles continue to reoccur in our society. So you do have a group of Black Americans that are older that are saying, hey, we've been around the bend on this before. We've seen this happen before. We've seen, Black people get out in the streets and march and demand their rights. And we've been given certain things, but we're still not as far as we need to be as a people. So they're like, listen, young people, have at it. Have at it. Go out there. Be passionate. Form your organizations and all those other things. But at this point, I'm tired. So I'm going to collect my Social Security, which may not be there in another 10 to 20 years, by the way. I'm going to collect my retirement, which may not be there if they change some of these other laws regarding finances and taxes. And I'm just going to rest on my laurels. Yeah, the Social Security is already near breaking point. So, that means my generation has to prepare, and they're saying if you want to be set, basically, to have something in the future and not be starving because of what has happened to Social Security, they're telling my generation, which is I'm 39. So they're telling my generation, you need to have saved up or invested at least $2 million by the time you get to retirement age, if you don't want to be struggling. So lots of different things have happened in our economy, and you have some in the older generation, as he says, that is just simply tired. They're tired of having to fight and having to struggle and having to war. But he's saying, even though you are tired, you still have a generation coming after you that is in their spring, that need to be encouraged, that need to be empowered, that need to be spoken life into, right? Yeah. It is, well, there's a huge wealth gap because of a lot of things. One of the number one reason for wealth gaps, especially between black and white America, is inheritance. You have to remember, while white people were building their wealth off of the backs of slaves, and then that wealth is now, I think they said about 87% of that original wealth that was built off of slavery is locked into white America, meaning you can't get it because it's locked into things like inheritance, trust funds, and those kinds of things. So there's about 13% of wealth that is available for anybody to earn or get. So the wealth gap has to do with inheritance. And because we were the prize, somebody typed that, we were the prize, we were the commodity, we didn't have a chance to build inherited wealth because we were the wealth, if that makes any sense. So when somebody asks, well, why don't black Americans have as much as everybody else? That's the reason why. Other people who came to this country were not the wealth of the country. We were. So don't let anybody make you feel bad about the wealth gap. The reality is it was intentional. It was deliberate. It was based on the slave trade. And that money did not just disappear. It went into banks. It went into stocks. It went into bonds. It went into trusts. So you were the wealth of the nation. All right? Which goes to the point that Cornel West says right here. Young people must know, read, and understand their history closely. You must prepare yourselves and become self-critical and be open to counsel from older people. Because the elders right now who were in the struggle in the 60s would love to help this young generation, but a lot of this young generation has actually written off the older people. They have. A lot of them have written them off, saying, this is not your grandma or your granddaddy's march. I am not my ancestors, yada yada yada, all of these catchphrases, I'm not my ancestors. You gonna catch these hands and all this stuff. Listen, you better sit down and you better start talking to the older people about the past and how they managed to get through these racial structures that were established in their day and time. Because guess what? You may have energy, you may have zeal, You may have technological know-how, but you don't have wisdom. You don't have wisdom. And wisdom oftentimes comes through the experience of the struggle and learning what not to do. So now we have a march, and now we have a struggle that has in many ways been co-opted. That means usurped and snatched up by white corporations in the background who are funneling money to young black people to go start a revolution. But what they forgot to tell you was, you better listen to your ancestors and the wisdom that they have that the white corporations who are funding you don't have. Okay, I'm going to get off of that subject. So, he says something here about black colleges. I want you to listen. Because yes, we encourage, right? We encourage young people. Let me set my timer here. I'm going to give myself 15 minutes. We encourage young people, and I'm not going to get to the prophets today, obviously. But we encourage young people to go to college. We encourage young people to go to an HBCU, right? A lot of people don't realize that many of the HBCUs were founded by white Americans to teach you how to assimilate into American culture. Just do the research. So just because it says it's a historically black college and university doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to go in there and learn about yourself and learn about your culture. Please do your research on the school that you're going to. All right? But even Cornell says this. He says, today, even our black colleges have become deeply shaped by capitalist values. In other words, the value of simply making money. Making money. As long as it makes me money, I'm going to do it. Most of our students are graduating in business and communication and find humanistic studies as decorative. Oh, that's something I have to take because it's part of the path that people used to study, but I want to make that money. I'm going to zip through my humanities classes to take business because I'm going to be rich. That's not just the aspiration of black students, that's students across the board. The bling bling attitude is deeply shaping the values of a whole new generation to whom Malcolm X is Malcolm the 10th and Martin Luther King Jr. is some cultural icon that has no connection whatsoever to their everyday lives. We have a generation that is the most schooled in history, in the history of black people, but in a deep sense, they're still not the most educated. All right, let me say that again. We have a generation that is the most schooled, but not the most educated. Their attention is for sale to the highest bidder. Mindless repetition is what pleasure, instant gratification, and addiction are all about. Indiscriminate consumption and distraction is twirling of their minds like a top that just goes around and around. If you start from bling bling, G-string, egoism, narcissism, and hedonism, and someone asks you to shift your attention towards things like truth, justice, compassion, and serving others, it can be difficult to comprehend. But that's what education in its deepest sense is. The turning of the soul. The aim of education is to get people to shift from the surface to something more substantial. You can have all the schooling in the world, but if you're still on the surface, you're not really educated. You can't engage in the turning of the soul without history, memory, and wrestling with mortality so that your soul becomes mature. What is Cornel West saying? He's saying that a lot of the students now are going to college. They're picking their majors based on how much money can I make. They're not spending enough time in the courses that help you to shape things like morality, truth, justice, compassion, and service. So they're coming out with a 4-year degree, right? And totally morally bankrupt. And I can guarantee you that's not what most parents send their students to college for. They don't send you to college just to make money. He said that took 6 years to learn. They don't send you to college just to make money. They send you to college with the hope that you're learning how to be an adult, how to develop skills for life, not just take some classes for 4 years and come out and be able to make some money. Anybody can do that. You don't have to have a moral compass to make money. But you do have to have a moral compass if you want to live as a human being and a citizen of the world. And so what he's finding is, in his travels, you have Black America has shifted from going to school to shape a character to just going to school to get a degree and make money. And that's something that we need to think about and be introspective about. All right? Listen to what he says here. So you end up with the most brilliant young people whose souls are underdeveloped because they haven't been educated in that sense. They are twirling tops. They're brilliant, exposed to the world. They can talk to you about Europe and Africa. They've been to Asia. They know 6 or 7 languages, which is beautiful and impressive. It's a nice skill that the system of America can use. But in terms of deep education, the education of the soul is not sufficient. To be truly educated, you need a sense of history and the courage to examine yourself and the world, but you also need examples. You have to have direct access to examples. Good examples are the go-kart of good judgment. What is he talking about? He's talking about the need of the younger generation to have examples, leaders, coaches, people who can speak into their life concerning their character. And I know Apostle Vanessa has a very good program in his Wholeness Image class that really is helping people to look on the inside, to deal with that soul person, that whole person. All right? He says, we often have nostalgic thoughts about the older people in our lives who really affected us. This could be grandmothers, aunts, uncles, the older sister, the brother hanging out. We remember how their concrete examples stirred our souls because we had real access to them. Somebody put on the screen, real access. And if you're an older person today, I would say if you're over 30, ask yourself, how accessible am I to the next generation? How accessible am I to the next generation? Am I availing myself to be a voice of truth to the next generation? Am I availing myself to be a listening ear to the next generation? You got to ask yourself that. Yes, I can look out and I can see the foolishness that's going on. But at the same time, who am I availing myself to in the next generation that I can be a voice of truth to them? Yes. Some of you may live in a college town, right? How are you availing yourself on the college campus? Even if it's only 1 hour during the week or 1 hour on the weekend, find a way to avail yourself to the coming generation. 1 hour. How many of us know college students that have access to campus space? They have access to a room, or they can get access to a room on a weekly basis, a monthly basis, a quarterly basis, where you can offer Q&A 1 hour a week or 1 hour a month. Ask me anything you want. If I don't know the answer, we'll look it up together and we'll find the answer together. So it's not even about you necessarily knowing more than them, but again, it's about, do they have real access to people that they can see right in front of them as good examples? Here's something else he says, and we're starting to close. You can't gain access to wise judgment just through schooling. Schooling means you follow the rules, do well on the tests, and say what the boss wants you to say for a promotion. Judgment comes from both a cultivated mind and intelligence, but also from hanging around people who are grand examples of greatness, who exercise wise judgment. If you don't have those kind of people in your life, you're not going to be moved enough to really want to know what deep education is. And this is something that I am very thankful for, that I had grandmothers that availed themselves to me. I didn't have grandmothers that were trying to be teenagers. I had grandmothers that were grandmothers. So when I was in college, I got a chance every break I had. I was down at my grandmother's house. Yeah, I would see my friends, the ones that were still alive after the drug wars, what was left of them. Yeah, I would see them, say hi, how y'all doing? But when I came home from college on my breaks, I spent time at my grandmother's knees. Whatever they wanted to do, I was hanging out with them. If my grandmother wanted to push her three-wheeler around and go from door to door and talk to older people and minister to people and talk to crackheads and all that, I went right along with her. My other grandmother was more, she had health problems, so she stayed inside a lot. So I would go to grandmother's house, I would sit at her feet, and I would just let her talk, and I would listen. So I am very, very thankful for the life lessons that were deposited into me, because I know that not everybody had that experience. And not everybody wanted that experience, right? My grandmother was a very wise woman. People would take their vacation time. I'm talking about adults. I'm talking about her children and other people, grown people. They would take their vacation time and they would come from other states and they would spend their days with my grandmother, sitting down in the living room with her talking. So when I recognized that other people were taking their vacation time to come talk to my grandmother, I was like, wait a minute now. Let me get in on some of this wisdom. So You have to recognize when to gather wisdom. That's a whole other teaching. Recognize when is the time to gather wisdom. Oh, but you're a very wise woman, Apostle. Yep. And so it's very important that young people have people in the direct vicinity, not just what they see on television, but they need to have people in their direct vicinity, real examples, real life examples of people who are encouraging them, who are pouring into them, more than just capitalism, more than just you got to make that money, more than just you got to make that paper, because they're going to hear that message over and over and over again in American society. They're going to hear that message. That message is going to be solidified. So what other messaging, what other encouragement can you give to the younger generation? Okay, so as we close, I'm going to leave with that. I'm going to think about that. And we'll be back tomorrow. Tomorrow we're going to be talking about world religions again. We're going to be talking about atheism, and we're going to be back in our book, Why So Many Gods. If we don't get to Why So Many Gods, I do want to make sure I share with you about these two prophets. And the prophets that I want to share with you about are Joel and who's the other one? Joel and Amos. Joel prophesies about the coming of locusts, and Amos speaks God's message against social injustice. Please do it all. I'm trying to keep my time to an hour because, I know that we're all busy people and have schedules to look at. But thank you again so much for joining. I hope that you enjoyed what Cornel West had to say. We'll probably touch again on family on Monday of next week. And these are some of his grandkids whose lives that he is invested in. All right. So we want to be people that are investing in the lives of young people. We don't want to look up and see what has happened to our nation and have so much judgment upon it. But at the same time, God is going to turn to us and say, well, what did you do? What was the part that you played? Because we can talk about the generation coming behind us, but we also have to ask ourselves, have I done anything to help steer the generation coming behind me into a right direction? It's not just on them. It's also on us. All right. Thank you again for your time and attention. Until we meet again tomorrow, 11 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. Thank you so much. Take care and God bless. Let's see. All right, who's praying for me not to be able to get off?